You're listening to Hockey Talk on the Rock
All right, stop.
with Laura and Keith.
It's interesting.
So let's back up a second.
He played absolutely out of his mind.
It made no sense to me.
And now, here are your hosts.
Ready, Hockey Talk on the Rock, episode 23. We're back, Salt Spring Island. That's Laura. I'm Keith. We're gonna talk some stuff. It is actually not Friday like we normally do. It is Sunday, the 21st of March. The Canucks were playing Friday after work at our usual time, and it kind of threw us off. So we're a few days behind schedule. So there's a few more games that we can talk about, and kick over to you, Laura, because there was a number of Canucks games since we last talked, and things mostly went pretty well.
Yeah, I think the whole road trip they ended up being like 6-0 and 2, something like that. And so in like comparison to how they were playing a couple weeks ago, things are really good. It's just, again, it's unfortunate that they had that slow of a start, and unfortunately, because of these last two games, it kind of puts a sour taste in your mouth compared to where they could have been. And again, like the two games against Montreal, like these last two ones, the thing that hurts the most is they did have an opportunity to win both those games in overtime. Oh, not in overtime, in regulation, and then they let them both go to overtime, which essentially ended up with them getting 3 points out of that 2-game set, but so did Montreal. So basically, they're exactly where they were against Montreal before those two games, which on one hand you can look at as a positive thing because they played so poorly against Montreal the first few games that they played them. A split is probably a best case scenario, but then you look at what Montreal's been able to do against Vancouver, and if they make the playoffs and Vancouver doesn't, it's 100% on their record versus Vancouver, right? So
Sure. So
um,
did you have any faith at all that they were going to win the second game with Holtby going to net?
I thought there was a chance only because it was Montreal, and I wasn't sure what their level of compete was going to be like for that second game. But I was pretty sure they were going to lose, and that kind of brings, I guess, to the point that I was going to make it sometime here, is like, I understand why you have to start Holtby. I get it, right? It's back-to-back games. You don't want to have Demko hurt. You don't want to overplay him, all that. It makes sense. But I really think kind of what John Garrett suggested this week was maybe he should have had one of the games against Ottawa. And then even if you lose that game against Ottawa, it's not as big a deal as losing in overtime to Montreal was, just in terms of you're giving your competition direct points then, right?
Right.
But it, like, again, I don't want to take away from what the Canucks have done as a whole, because I feel like it's been impressive. Like, specifically Demko has been amazing this past like 2-3 weeks. Really, the last month he's been one of the best goalies in the league. And the Canucks, as soon as they get that Vesper caliber goaltending, it's like, okay, they're okay again. What a surprise. And to do it without Pettersson in the lineup has been more impressive. And I definitely feel last game they did have offense, which was nice to see, but you definitely think that they're starting to miss Pettersson, and you notice it like on the power play, although again last game Besser scored that really nice goal. And I think that's something like that I've mentioned a few times when watching the games, is like, again, on one hand, I understand why you put Besser. This is kind of changing subjects, but I understand why you put him on the goal line because you want to set up that bumper play to Horvat. I get that. But to me, with his shot, he needs to be up high. He's so much more effective when he's up high. And like when Pettersson comes back, they can have Pettersson on the right side and Besser on the left. And then you have this dual threat of guys who can really shoot the puck. And right now, even with JT Miller, it's working pretty well. And that's something that I've been hoping that they were going to do. And then last game, it really, like, they basically did it, which was really nice to see. But yeah, like I hope, I know they have a few days off here, like after the 26th or something, they don't play for a week, which is going to be nice for a couple reasons. But I think, first of all, Pettersson should be back by the end of that. So if he doesn't play these 2 games against Winnipeg, I expect he'll be back after their break. But then also, you're going to be able to kind of actually understand where you are for the first time, I think, since the beginning of the season, because the Canucks played so many games at the beginning of the season that they've always been ahead of everyone. So after next week, those games in hand that Montreal has and Calgary has specifically, we're going to see what they do with them, and we'll see if the Canucks are totally in the doghouse, like, or if they have a fighting shot. So
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the Pedersen injury because it's definitely allowed, like, there's multiple injuries going on now, right? So it's allowed an opportunity to take a look at other guys, and we've talked a little bit about Hauerbuck and Michaelis coming in, and I thought they looked all right. I mean, Hauerbuck was obviously more noticeable. I think everyone would probably agree with that.
Yep.
And bring me to my next point, another person that's been given the opportunity with the injuries is new addition to the team, Jimmy Vesey.
yeah,
The Jimmy, who was claimed off the waivers from Toronto on, what was it, Friday morning?
it was Friday because he tried to play the game and oh no, it was Wednesday.
It was
Thursday,
Wednesday.
Wednesday. It was the Ottawa game because he tried to play that game, right, but then he didn't have the proper visa to play.
Yeah, so I mean, it's allowed them to also kind of see what it would look like if they moved out a couple bodies and had to use these guys in the lineup at the deadline and whatnot. So I've thought for the majority of it, I've kind of enjoyed it. It's been nice to see some guys like Oglander and Gaudette starting to put the puck in the net again, and the depth starting to pay off a little bit.
I think, like, for Gaudette specifically too, he had like one of the worst shooting percentages in the NHL the first like half of this season. So you kind of figured those things usually balance out, right? Like the guys that start off really hot, it usually tapers off a bit, and guys that start really slow, it also usually picks up a bit. So I kind of think that maybe Gaudette's gonna have a, like, not a breakout to the second half of the season, but I think he's going to be a lot more noticeable, kind of like he's been in these past couple games, and hopefully be able to put the puck in the net a bit. Because I think if he can, I've said this for a while, if he can play on the wing and they could get someone else to play third line center, I really think that that's more suited for him. And he can be more offensive, right? But Jimmy Vesey, I think, was a very smart pickup for the Canucks, kind of going back to that. I mean, the hype around him when he came out of college was ridiculous, and he is not the player that he was hyped up to be, right? No one thinks that. But getting him from Toronto and essentially only having to pay whatever it is on the rest of his like 900,000 deal is really good for the Canucks. He's a better fit in that bottom six than I think what a lot of the Canucks had or who the Canucks were playing. And so, like you said, if they move someone out, because right now they do have a bunch of injuries, I think it's like he's a placeholder and he's a fine placeholder. So it was smart, and he can put the puck in the net. That is something he can do. So you're hoping that maybe it helps, the offense from the bottom six a bit there as well. So I like the move.
I would almost put to you, what do you think of the idea of potentially having this as a trial run for him, and also knowing that when he was coming out of university, Vancouver was one of the 4 finalists for signing him.
Yeah.
Do you think he might be worth coming back, even on a 1-year deal after this one, to give Vancouver a full 1-year go, and then it might allow the Vancouver the opportunity to not have to worry about trying to re-sign someone like Tanner Pearson, maybe?
Yeah, I would be fine with that. I do have a point that I'm gonna make later about the Canucks that I think would be interesting, but we'll get back to it. I think I would be fine if he stuck around, but obviously it depends on what he looks like this past or for the next 25 whatever games that they have left. And I know that Toronto fans were quite hard on Jimmy Vesey when he was there, but I think that it's also a totally different situation in Vancouver. And if you can get him on that kind of league minimum-ish deal, the Canucks will be happy, right?
Yeah.
The other player that I kind of think the same of is Travis Hamonic. Like, I know a lot of people are saying to move him at the deadline, but
No,
he's
I don't
one
like
of
that.
those guys that I would rather they just go to and say, hey, can we work out a deal for next year? Like,
Yeah, I agree. He's looked, especially like not the first go round when he came into the lineup, but
Yeah.
after he got back from injury and got comfortable, he's looked really, really good. Like he kind of looks like Tanev in that way that we kind of thought he would.
Yeah, he's been a good fit with Hughes, and I'm really hopeful for that because again, it seems like it's a good fit for both parties. So there's something there, I think. But what I was gonna pose to you as a question about the Canucks at the trade deadline. So I think everyone's fear, right, is that I was gonna say Gillis. Benning is gonna go out and spend money because he's gonna think that he can get back into the fight.
Right.
Which at this point I don't think is going to happen because I just don't think the Aquilinis want to spend money. And I think we saw that with that Jake Virtanen potential trade where they didn't want to take on any extra money and that's why it fell apart, right? However, I was thinking to myself, what would happen if the Canucks could get like basically a replacement for Tanner Pearson that's on a really good deal, who has a year left after next year at the deadline. Um, like if you could make a kind of almost Tyler Toffoli trade, but with someone who is going to be around next year as well. And the player I'm thinking of is Rickard Rakell, because I think he would be a nice fit in the top six for Vancouver. And I honestly wouldn't be opposed if they gave up prospects to get someone like that, because I know, again, you're going to have to, this is the whole thing with this deadline, right? They're going to have to give money back to Anaheim to take him. But Raquel's deal's like only around 3 million. He's a pretty decent top six forward. I think he would be nice.
So you think that if they had interest in Bertan and the Heinen deal, maybe he could be the centerpiece for the
Yeah,
money?
like you're probably gonna have to give up a pick, right? Like a first or a second and maybe a prospect. But I think the asking point from Anaheim, they were talking about it on 31 Thoughts, it's not very high. And I know he hasn't been great for like he was really good his first few years in the league and he hasn't been as good the last couple, but I almost feel like he's like a Tyler Toffoli-ish fit for the Canucks, I guess. And you get that cost set certainty for the next year, which for Vancouver I really like. And we've already talked about their whole protection thing. So for Vancouver, you don't have to worry about protecting him or exposing him, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like he probably doesn't move until the off season because of the whole cap situation. But if they were willing and Vancouver was in on it, I think that would be a good pickup for them.
I agree. What do you do like Bertan a second and Jet Wu?
Yeah, I put Jet Wu, and then I don't know if like Cole Lind would be asking too much, but like one of those two-ish players was kind of what I was thinking of.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, but
We'll see. It's gonna be an interesting deadline, and I feel like in the next week or two, we're gonna start to see things happen if they're gonna be cross-border things, you know?
yeah, it should happen soon. The other player that this one might be kind of out of the blue, but I'm going with Buffalo just for 2 seconds here because again, everyone knows how terrible their season's been. They fired their coach now, all that stuff. I think it was Rasmus Ristolainen that came out and said, we've had like a bunch of coaches and a bunch of GMs, but at a certain point, I think it's the players that basically need to be held accountable, which is not a good thing to say about your own team, but makes sense. They're not in a good situation, and there's been tons of talk about Eichel leaving and Eric Stahl going back to Carolina, which I think would be a nice story if that happens. And the player that I think is really fascinating with Buffalo is Rasmus Dahlin, and the reason why I say that is because he's been awful defensively. He's like offensively, he's been all right for his career so far. But defensively, he's never looked great. And I think you might like where I'm going with this. And I don't think it happens, but I think they have the pieces to do it if they wanted to. What about if they moved him to LA? Because as we've talked about, LA has tons of forward prospects. They have tons of
I,
young players. and they don't really have those defensive prospects or young D-men. And I feel like for him, he's almost at the point where he needs a change to be anything remotely close to what he was like advertised to be.
Yeah, I can see it, especially if they like made the centerpiece being like Byfield or something.
Yeah, and I mean they even like they have like Velarde and Turcotte and like Kaliev, like they have so much in terms of like prospects on forward, right?
Yeah, young American forwards.
Yeah. So I don't know if I just feel like there's a fit between those two teams, and that's something I'm gonna keep my eye on. Again, I don't think it happens at the deadline because that would be pretty crazy if it did. But
I think LA is going to be distracted because everything I read is about how Patrick Laine ultimately is going to end up in LA.
yeah,
So they like from what I've read, they said you can almost expect Laine to be moved again in season
in season,
Yeah.
wow, that would be crazy.
to LA. Yeah, well, because they're already out of the
Yeah,
race, right? Columbus has had a pretty crappy year, so
yeah,
they'll be trying to stock up for next year.
yeah. That'll be yeah. If he got moved again this year, it'd be nuts. But I
Uh,
think LA would
LA
be.
has the pieces.
They do. They have the pieces for everything. They're an interesting team to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But the other kind of big NHL news this week was with Ovechkin. He's now sixth all time in goals. He has 718, which is pretty insane. Especially just in terms of the era that he's played in, with it not being as high scoring as the 80s and 90s kind of thing. Well, 90s were low scoring, but
And the goalies being as quality as they are.
yeah. So I think he's like within like 170 or something now.
Yeah, it's 894 for Gretzky.
Yeah. And I've hoped for the last couple of years when it started to look like it might be possible. I really hope he does it. It's going to suck if the reason why he doesn't do it is because of the 2 lockouts and then the 2 shortened seasons because of COVID.
Yeah.
So it's going to be hard because it's hard to score goals. And as you get older, it's harder to score goals. So
I still believe in my heart of hearts that he has 2, 3, 40 goal seasons left in him. So if he can pull that off, then I think he can trickle in the final 50 over the last twilight years.
yeah, it's totally up to him, right? Like whatever he wants. If there's been lots of rumors with him that the last few years he wants to play in Russia, and if that's the case, then it's not going to happen, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I also think that, and I'm stealing this I'm stealing this thought from Elliot Friedman because he's talked about it. Like after he had his kid, there was lots of talk about how Ovechkin really wanted his kid to be able to see him play and like remember him playing. So if that's the case, then he'll probably stick around the NHL for longer.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll
That's cool.
see. But that was pretty big in terms of NHL news. He's climbing up fast, so we'll see.
Yeah, it's insane.
But I don't know, did we actually talk about the Ralph Kruger firing?
No, that happened since our last episode.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, the tire fire in Buffalo continues, and after 12 losses in a row, or they went 0-10-2 or whatever it was, Ralph Kruger got fired. Don Granato, I believe he was the assistant coach,
yeah,
got bumped into the interim role, and new GM Kevin Adams is looking to hire a new coach and trade everybody and start all over again. And the Pagulas sound like worse owners than the Aquilinis.
yeah. There was someone who did a comparison of who's been through the most pain, Vancouver fans or Buffalo fans, because I mean, there's obviously lots of parallels there because they both came into the league at the same time, and their ownership has right now been quite questionable. They've both never won a Stanley Cup, so they went through all the miserable memories of being either a Sabres or a Canucks fan, and I really feel sorry for Buffalo. There was a point in time, like probably 10 years ago, when Christian Ehrhoff left Vancouver for Buffalo, and I was so mad. I was so mad when he left, and I was like, I hope you suck. And then they did. And now I'm like, okay, I think I'm kind of over that. They can be okay again, It'd be nice to see their fans be somewhat rewarded, because I know Buffalo fans, like, in terms of viewership of hockey in the States, is like one of the biggest hotspots. So I feel like they probably deserve a bit of a better product. And I think, when we're all ranking, like, or doing our preseason rankings, I did have them below New Jersey, and I thought that that was a risk. I was like, I don't know, I think it could go either way. And now it looks pretty smart, but I don't think anyone expected Buffalo to be like this much of a punching bag.
No, no way. I mean, they certainly like didn't benefit from the new divisions or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they don't get to beat up on Ottawa or whatever. But
Yeah, or Detroit or whatever. But I don't even think at this point, I don't think they would, right? Like, and I mean, part of that is like Eichel's out. Uh, who else is out? I feel like they have another big injury. But in general, they're just, I think, like, there was a stat. Oh man, who was the player? It was like Eichel, Reinhardt, and another player. Okay, I'm gonna have to look it up because I'm not gonna be able to figure it out. But they have 5 goals, and then this other guy had 5, who's not a very decent player.
Taylor Hall probably.
Yeah. Anyway, it's just they've had such bad luck this year, and I'm assuming they're gonna move Hall at the deadline, and they would be crazy if they didn't. But at this point, I don't even know how much you can get back for him.
I think Anaheim's going to be a team that really starts to move on from players this deadline.
Yeah.
And well, they've got a good youth movement going on too, I think.
Yeah, I think Anaheim is close, and I was gonna say your boy Jamie Drysdale. He got his first couple NHL assists
Yep.
the other night, and Trevor Zegras scored his first NHL goal. So I feel like the switch is starting to happen. And with John Gibson, I know he hasn't been as good as he was like the past couple of years, but you think if they can get a better team in front of him, he might still be able to give them something. That
Yeah.
always helps. So their team to watch. I think Anaheim and LA are both gonna get better faster than we think. And then there's the other California team that just looks like a total tire fire as well. And they're like, in 2025, I just read this, they're going to be still paying like all their big guys, right? They're still going to be paying Kane and Carlson and Burns and Vlasic. And I think one more. But it's just crazy. Like, that team is going to be awful for a while. I thought they were going to have a bounce back year this year. Totally missed on that one. But yeah, they're going to be in tough shape, I think. But the other two look like they're kind of coming out of it now.
Yeah, I agree. I think San Jose's insistence on not rebuilding really crippled them.
Yeah, and I mean, again, like with Erik Karlsson, like he came out this week and was saying, like, I didn't want to go through another rebuild. I didn't want to put up with what I had to put up with in Ottawa or whatever. And I understand, like, if you're a competitive player and all that, but at the same time, like, when you went to San Jose and you looked around the room, could you not kind of tell that they're at the end of their competitiveness?
Yeah.
Like, your window's essentially closing when you join the team. And I get it that you didn't think, like, for in terms of Karlsson, like, he must have not thought it was going to happen that fast. I don't think anyone really did, but it's not that unpredictable that they're bad, right? Like, their key players are all getting older, and that happens, and they don't have goaltending. So those are not a good situation to be in.
I think they could be a little bit better if they did have even one decent goaltender.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know, like, what they're gonna do. I think they said they wanted to move on from Dubnyk. That was like the new rumor. I'm like, who's gonna take Devin Dubnyk?
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like,
It was kind of surprising they traded for them at the beginning there.
yeah. I don't know. Weird team, but I kind of get a feeling that it might be them that ends up with the first overall pick this year. I don't know why. It's just my weird guess right now. But that's the other thing, like in terms of prospects and all that we talked about them not playing and everything, but just in terms of like prospect hype, normally at this time of year, right, there's people like hyping up like the first overall pick, the top 3 or whatever. This
Yeah.
year there's like nothing. There's like, okay, Owen Power that people kind of talk about, and then Luke Hughes.
Yeah.
That's it. Like those are the only two names I've even heard about, and it's just been so dead quiet. So it'll be a very interesting draft. But
This is why this is the year to trade draft picks. If you want to trade draft picks, I'm thinking.
it's true.
Right.
But yeah, I
I
gotta
think on that note, I think you're going to see the Flyers trade a first rounder pretty quick here.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about your Flyers. That was the next thing on my list with their not so nice week.
They've defensively they've just dropped into one of the worst in the league all of a sudden, whereas they looked so good early on. So I think what they want to do is try to bring in a Matt Niskanen type guy who he really stabilized the decor. And I think in the early part of the year they thought they had that with Eric Gustafsson, but he's kind of like a bit older version of Shane Gostisbehere, really.
Yep.
So they don't really help the defensive side of things.
Yeah.
So I'm betting, between now and the deadline for sure, you'll see a pretty big deal between them and either Nashville for Ekholm.
Yep.
And they would probably have to give up a first to Nolan Patrick or something like that.
Yep.
Because Ekholm was signed next year too, right?
Yep.
Which is going to be difficult for the Flyers because then they're in a real tough spot for their defense on the expansion draft. But anyways,
yeah.
Trading. Apparently Anaheim might be finally ready to move on from Josh Manson, and apparently Philadelphia would be
interested.
Yeah, and then what was the other two? There was a couple more. David Savard on Columbus was a name that's out there, and then there was one more I can't remember, but it seems like they're pretty focused on getting a pretty steady defensive top four guy.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see like the market for that too, right? Because like I know obviously with Ekholm specifically, like I thought Philadelphia and Winnipeg and Toronto are gonna be like the three teams that I would think of that would be interested in picking up him. But there's probably others, right? Like everyone wants, especially because he has that extra year. Although, as you say, for some teams that's going to be harder than for others. Like Winnipeg, for instance, on their D, I'm sure they'd be comfortable picking up a guy like Ekholm.
Because the expansion draft wouldn't be so harmful to them.
Yeah. But, okay. So it will be interesting. The other thing I think that just to keep an eye on in terms of the trade deadline is like there's a couple of contending-ish teams that have very spotty backup goaltenders. So like I'm thinking Tampa Bay and Colorado specifically, but even St. Louis that all might be looking for an upgrade. And there's a bunch of teams that are now going to start looking for the expansion draft that they might have to expose someone that they don't want to expose. And so it'll be interesting to see if there's some movement around the backup goalie situation.
What are you thinking?
I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't think anyone's going to take Holtby off of Vancouver right now. But especially with his price tag, right? But I think Florida is interesting. They're interesting for a number of reasons. I mean, the first is that they're a good team this year. So I don't know if they want to move Jigger like in the season. It's probably going to be an off-season thing, right?
Yeah.
But he would be very highly sought after as a goalie.
I've read Merzlikins' name is out there.
Merzlikins makes sense. I mean, one of those two. I know with Columbus, one of the two they don't have to expose. I can't remember which one it is. So it's like on them if they want to move him and get something they can. But Merzlikins makes a lot of sense for sure for those guys. I'm trying to think who else. Who else has decent goalies?
Yeah, I mean Dallas would probably want to shore up.
Actually, Dallas is a good one because they could move on from Hudobin reasonably well. Because Jake Ottinger's looked pretty solid.
Bishop start all the time.
Yeah, That's the problem, right?
Yeah, but if he wasn't, he's he's
Yeah.
not good enough to be able to trade, so you'd have to move one of them.
Yeah. And the rumor is that he's pretty close to being able to return, so and Dallas looks like they're totally out of it, although they do have the most games left because they've gotten delayed so many times, but they have to win a ton of them to be able to get back into it, so
Right.
they're a team that would be probably willing to move on. So anyway, that's like my trade center talk.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for the trade deadline. Really figure out what day it is and take that day off work.
Yeah, that's smart. The only kind of other Canucks-ish thing I wanted to talk about was with I was gonna say Rick, but it's not Rick, with Mikey DiPietro. So there's been a lot of talk around him lately because he's on their taxi squad. He hasn't played a game in like a year. He's a young goalie. At some point in time, you gotta think you gotta send him down to Utica or whatever and get him in some games because at this point it's a little bit scary that he hasn't played in so long. And I think the reason why the Canucks haven't done that is because they don't have another goalie they can put on their taxi squad.
So yeah, I also read that expect the Canucks to make like the next goalie waiver claim. Apparently, when Ottawa claimed Anton Forsberg, if he would have gotten past Ottawa, Vancouver would have taken him.
Okay.
Is what I read, and it was for like this exact reason to put Forsberg on the taxi squad
And
and
then
be able to send DiPietro down because they're they even considered. I think after they sent him down, they talked about how they would bring up what's the goalie in Utica right now? What's his name? The university kid they signed.
I can't think, but I know who you're talking about.
I in my head it's Sylvie, but it's not Sylvie.
It's something like that, yeah.
And so they want to bring him up to the taxi squad so they'd be protected for, if and when that for cap reasons they got to put Forsberg back through waivers and blah blah blah, right?
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Jake Keeley.
Healy, yeah.
So yeah, they want to bring him up to the taxi squad, but because of the quarantine, it's difficult.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's what I read.
Yeah, so I hope that's true because it would be good for him in the long run. Again, it looks like the Canucks have lucked out a bit here with Demko, and he looks like the real deal, and they brought him along really slow, but it's always good to have those, goalie prospects develop for you, and it's something in general I think the Canucks have done pretty well. I was talking about it the other day. The Canucks, like in the past 10 years, let's say, like since they got Luongo, really, so longer than 10 years, they've had really decent goaltending for basically the whole time, right? Like you had Luongo, and then they traded him or whatever. I mean, you had Luongo and Schneider specifically, and then traded both of them. Then you end up with Ryan Miller, who played phenomenally for Vancouver and basically made them a better team than what they actually were at that point.
Yeah.
And then you get Markstrom, who took a while, but he developed and he became, again, better than what the team deserved or gave them more wins. And now you're getting that kind of play out of Demko, which is very nice to see. And I mean, I know not all those players the Canucks developed, but I think they get some of the credit there with Markstrom and definitely with Demko. So
Yeah, I'll say that there was that one year where Nilsson and Markstrom were trying to figure out who was going to be the guy.
yeah,
That neither of them were really great that year until Markstrom kind of figured it out later.
yeah,
So there was one bad year, but like you say, every other year was really good for the goaltending for the last decade for Vancouver. And lost my other thought, sorry.
it's all good. That's basically all I had for today anyway. I just ran through my list of stuff, so unless you have anything else to...
No, I enjoyed rambling on with you today, and I don't have anything more really. We'll do it again next week.
Sounds good.
And I assume they've got at least one game between now and then we can talk about.
I think they have two against Winnipeg, so those will be big games because Winnipeg just lost 2 to Edmonton, so I'm guessing they're going to be pretty inspired to win a couple games here. So
Right.
I'm hoping that Vancouver's prepared for that and that they win one of the two, because I have no faith that they're gonna win both. But I'd hope for a split here, and then they'll have their break, and then we'll see where the team is at.
Awesome. Well, hopefully for a good week, and do it again next week. So thanks for listening, anybody, and we'll do it again for episode 24 next weekend.